Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be diving into a pretty heavy topic, World War I,
Oh, yeah.
specifically July 1914, the weeks leading up to the outbreak of the war.
Right.
And, we always say this, but the sources you found for this one are,
Incredible.
yeah, unbelievable. I mean, letters, diaries. We even have some clips from another history podcast.
It's amazing what's out there right
Yeah,
there.
you really get a sense of just how tense things were,
Eh.
how much dread people were feeling.
Oh, absolutely. And you can see why, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand,
Right.
that was the spark, but there were decades of tensions bubbling under the surface.
Like a fault line.
Exactly, just waiting for that earthquake.
And I think one of the things that really struck me reading through these accounts was just how vulnerable Austria-Hungary felt.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
they saw the assassination as an attack on their authority, on the very idea of their empire.
It's understandable why they reacted so strongly.
Absolutely. They were determined to punish Serbia, but at the same time, you see this disconnect between what they wanted to do and what they were actually capable of doing.
Right, they were this lumbering giant trying to move at lightning speed.
Exactly. Their decision-making was so slow, so bureaucratic, weighed down by all the different factions within the empire.
And then there's that image of their army being on harvest leave as they're about to go to war.
It's almost comical, right?
Yeah, they completely missed the memo.
It really highlights those internal challenges they faced. And it also speaks to this broader theme of just institutional inertia across Europe.
Right, everyone's operating on these outdated assumptions.
And completely failing to grasp how quickly things are escalating.
And then, of course, there's Germany's infamous blank check to Austria-Hungary.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
It seems so reckless from our perspective.
Well, sure, with hindsight, but at the time, German leaders genuinely believed they were in control.
They underestimated Russia,
Massively. They thought Russia was weak, unprepared.
and they thought they could contain the situation.
They were wrong on both counts.
It's like they were playing poker with a handful of jokers and thinking they had a royal flush.
A perfect analogy. And meanwhile, Russia was playing a whole different game. Their focus was on the Balkans.
That access to the Mediterranean,
Crucial for their navy and their economy.
and they were already locked in that naval arms race with the Ottoman Empire.
Exactly. So they were feeling the pressure to secure their position.
And Austria-Hungary's aggression toward Serbia was a direct threat to their interests.
It was about control of those vital sea lanes.
So we have Austria-Hungary ready for a fight, Germany blinded by overconfidence, and Russia feeling increasingly threatened.
And then you add France to the mix,
Right, still smarting from that defeat in the Franco-Prussian War.
yearning to reclaim their lost territory and prestige.
It's almost Shakespearean, this thirst for revenge.
Revanchism, that's the term for it.
And yet what's so fascinating is that the assassination barely registers in the French press at first.
They were completely consumed by this murder trial.
Right? The former prime minister's wife shooting a newspaper editor?
Talk about a distraction.
It's amazing how these seemingly unrelated events can shape the course of history.
It really is.
So we have these four major players, each with their own motivations, their own miscalculations, all heading for a collision.
And then there's Great Britain,
Trying to stay above the fray,
trying to play the role of mediator.
hoping to avoid a wider conflict.
Their commitment to Belgian neutrality becomes key.
That's a line they're not willing to cross.
At least not at first.
But they're hesitant to fully commit to war, aren't they?
It's a tricky balancing act trying to preserve peace without abandoning their allies.
Or jeopardizing their own interests.
Exactly.
And this is where I think the personal element becomes so interesting.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You have Sir Edward Grey, Britain's foreign secretary, literally seeking solace at the zoo as the crisis unfolds.
Surrounded by caged animals.
It's a powerful image.
Right, this feeling of entrapment, impending chaos.
It humanizes these historical figures, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There were real people grappling with these immense pressures.
Making impossible choices.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive,
Okay.
what stands out to you as the most crucial takeaway so far?
The miscalculations, without a doubt. I mean, every nation is acting on these assumptions about the others, and they're all tragically flawed, underestimating their opponents, overestimating their own control, failing to grasp the consequences.
It's a cascade of errors.
Each one pushing Europe closer to the brink.
Yeah, it's a story of missed opportunities for sure.
Yeah.
But even as we get into like the final week of July, things are getting even more volatile, right?
Hmm.
I mean, Austria-Hungary is at war with Serbia. Russia is mobilizing its army Germany's on the verge of stepping in.
And yet you still see this desperate hope for peace in the sources these leaders are frantically sending telegrams, trying to find some way out.
But they're working with incomplete information, right?
Oh, absolutely. Fueled by rumors and suspicion.
Like a game of telephone.
Exactly. With the message getting more garbled along the way, and all the while the clock is ticking.
The armies are mobilizing.
Yeah.
It just feels like this sense of inevitability is growing.
Right, and Britain is caught in a really tough spot,
Trying to stick to that splendid isolation policy.
but also bound by their obligations to Belgium.
This tiny nation caught in the middle.
It's a classic dilemma principle versus pragmatism.
And you see this debate playing out within the British government. Some arguing to stay out no matter what.
Others saying war might be the only way to stop Germany.
And it's important to remember that splendid isolation wasn't just some idealistic notion.
It was a strategic calculation.
Right, for centuries, Britain's security depended on controlling the seas.
And preventing any one power from dominating Europe.
A German victory would have upset that balance.
Exactly, potentially giving them control of key ports and shipping lanes.
So it's a gamble either way.
Absolutely.
And meanwhile, you have Kaiser Wilhelm, the German leader, just swinging back and forth.
Between rage and desperation, it's fascinating.
One minute, he's sending these warm telegrams to Tsar Nicholas, appealing to their family ties.
The next, he's ranting about betrayal and encirclement.
It seems like he was under immense pressure,
Oh, for sure, prone to impulsive decisions.
believing what he wanted to believe.
There's even this episode where he convinces himself that Britain has promised to stay neutral.
Only to find out that's not the case.
Talk about a miscalculation.
It seems like everyone's operating on assumptions at this point, and the consequences are about to become very real.
Yeah, by July 31st, Germany has issued ultimatums to both Russia and France.
Demanding they halt their military preparations.
It's almost like they were trying to provoke a response.
Right, these ultimatums were designed to be rejected.
The one to France is particularly telling. They're given just 18 hours to declare neutrality,
An impossible demand.
given their alliance with Russia.
And then on August 3rd, Germany invades Belgium.
A blatant violation of international law.
It throws a wrench into British neutrality,
Up to this point, there was still a chance war could be avoided.
however slim.
But the invasion of Belgium changes everything. Public opinion in Britain swings hard against Germany.
The government can no longer justify staying out.
It's seen as a betrayal of their moral obligations and a strategic blunder.
And the sources from this period are just incredible. You could really feel the tension, the dread hanging over Europe.
Church sermons warning of destruction, newspapers filled with anxieties, everyday people writing about their fears in their diaries.
It's like a slow-motion train wreck.
And even those who initially welcomed the idea of war,
Those who saw it as a chance for glory.
they're starting to have second thoughts,
The reality is setting in.
replacing that patriotic fervor with a sense of dread.
And then on August 4th, Britain declares war on Germany,
Sir Edward Grey, watching those lamps being lit outside his window,
utters those haunting words, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime."
a chillingly accurate prediction.
It really is. And what's so striking is that while the war wasn't inevitable, it became harder and harder to avoid.
Each decision, each misjudgment, each missed opportunity pushed them closer to the brink,
And once those first shots were fired, the momentum was unstoppable.
like a chain reaction.
One event triggering the next until the whole thing comes crashing down.
And the human cost of that collapse was unimaginable.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it, about why this history still matters to us today, why we should even care about these events over a century later.
Right, and these sources, I think they offer some really powerful answers. For one thing, World War I just shattered this idea of inevitable progress that had dominated the 19th century.
Right. All those advancements in technology, industry, medicine, it felt like humanity was on this upward trajectory.
Exactly, and then the war comes along and it exposes the fragility of all that progress.
And the scale of the casualties is just mind-boggling.
Millions dead and entire generations wiped out.
For what? It all seems so meaningless in hindsight.
And that brings us to, I think, another key takeaway, the danger of unchecked nationalism.
Right. While national pride can be a good thing,
Of course.
in 1914 it became a weapon. It fueled those rivalries, made compromise impossible.
We see it over and over in these sources. The Germans feeling encircled the Russians, obsessed with Slavic unity, the French longing for revenge.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that these historical events, they still have lessons for us today.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when we see political rhetoric demonizing entire groups of people, when national identity becomes a tool for division.
That's when we need to remember the lessons of 1914.
Exactly. And there's this third point that I think the sources really drive home, and that's the interconnectedness of the world.
Right. What started as this localized conflict in the Balkans?
They quickly engulf the entire globe.
It shows how seemingly isolated events can have these massive ripple effects.
And that's even more true today than it was a century ago.
Absolutely, with global trade alliances, instant communication.
And we saw it with the financial crisis a few years ago, right?
Right.
One country goes down, the whole world feels it.
Exactly. And those forces of interconnectedness, they're even stronger now than they were in 1914.
Which leads to a question I've been thinking about. Could World War I have been avoided?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
As we've been going through these sources, there are all these what-if moments. What if Austria-Hungary had responded differently to the assassination? What if Germany hadn't given that blank check?
What if Britain had been clearer about their intentions?
It makes you wonder about the role of individuals in shaping history.
Right. Could different leaders have made different choices, averted the catastrophe, or were those underlying forces, the alliances, the nationalism, the economic rivalries, just too powerful?
It's like a Greek tragedy almost,
Right.
where the characters are fated to make the wrong choices.
But even within those constraints, I think individuals still have the power to act to potentially change the course of events.
And that brings us to what I think is the most important takeaway from all of this, the human cost of war.
It's easy to get lost in the grand narratives, the geopolitical maneuvering.
But ultimately, war is about people, about lives, lost families, shattered societies broken.
And these sources, they really bring that home.
You hear the anxieties of the wives and mothers, the despair of the soldiers, the grief of those left behind.
It reminds us that behind those headlines, those casualty statistics, there are real people experiencing unimaginable suffering.
And that's why it's so important to remember World War I, not just as some historical event, but as a testament to human resilience.
And the profound costs of conflict.
It's a story that forces us to reflect on our own choices, our own responsibilities, our shared humanity.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for us today? World War I might seem like ancient history, but as we've seen its echoes, they still resonate.
It's a reminder of how fragile peace is, how dangerous unchecked nationalism can be.
And how our actions can have these unintended consequences in an interconnected world.
And as you continue exploring history, remember to ask not just what happened, but why does it matter?
Because understanding the past, its triumphs and its tragedies can help us navigate the present.
And hopefully build a better future.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the origins of World War I. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning.